The colony that vanished without a trace. No bodies, no battle marks, no signs of panic. Just one word carved into a tree. That single word would go on to haunt American history for more than 4 centuries. In the late 1500s, the New World was still a mystery wrapped in rumor. Europe spoke of endless forests, strange people, rivers filled with fish, and land so fertile that crops grew without effort. For England, this land was not just opportunity, it was survival. Spain already ruled much of the Americas. France was expanding. England was falling behind. Queen Elizabeth I knew something had to change, and so, in 1587, she approved a bold and dangerous plan. England would establish its first permanent colony in North America. The location chosen was a small island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. Its name was Roanoke. At the time, it looked perfect, protected by water, rich in resources, and close enough to trade routes. But beneath its beauty lay isolation, uncertainty, and something far more sinister that history still cannot explain. The group that set sail was not made of soldiers, it was made of families. Men, women, and children boarded the ships with hope burning in their chests. They believed they were building the future, a new England across the sea. There were 117 colonists in total. Among them was a pregnant woman named Eleanor Dare. Her father, John White, had been appointed governor of the colony. He was not a warrior or a general. He was an artist, a map maker, and a man who believed deeply in civilization and order. White had already been to Roanoke once before. He knew the land was difficult, but he believed preparation and cooperation could overcome anything. He was wrong. The journey across the Atlantic was brutal. Weeks at sea meant storms, sickness, and fear. Food spoiled, water turned foul. Children cried through the nights while adults whispered prayers to a God they hoped had not forgotten them. When they finally reached Roanoke Island, the relief was overwhelming, but that relief didn't last long. The colony they were supposed to reinforce, an earlier English settlement, was gone, abandoned. No people, no explanation. Still, they stayed, because turning back meant failure. Life in Roanoke was harder than anyone had imagined. Supplies were limited. Relations with local Native American tribes were tense. Some tribes were friendly, others deeply suspicious of the English presence. Food shortages began almost immediately. By late 1587, it was clear the colony would not survive without help. Governor John White faced a terrible decision. Someone had to return to England to bring supplies, and that someone had to be him. White did not want to leave. His daughter Eleanor was heavily pregnant. His unborn grandchild would be the first English child born in the New World. But the colonists insisted. They needed food, tools, weapons, reinforcements. White promised he would return quickly. Before he left, the colonists made a pact. If they were forced to leave Roanoke, they would carve a message into a tree or post. If danger drove them away, they would carve a cross. It was their only form of insurance against the unknown. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Virginia Dare. She was the first English child born in North America. Just days later, White boarded a ship and sailed back toward England, unaware that he would not see his family again for many years. And by the time he returned, they would be gone. White's return to England was cursed by history. Just as he arrived, England was thrown into chaos. Spain was preparing to invade. The Spanish Armada, the largest naval force the world had ever seen, was heading toward English shores. every available ship was seized for defense. White begged, he pleaded, he waited, but no ships were allowed to leave. Days turned into months, months turned into years. 3 years passed. 3 years in which no supplies reached Roanoke. 3 years in which no letters came back. 3 years of silence. By 1590, England had survived the Armada, and White was finally granted passage. Old, exhausted, haunted by guilt, he sailed back to Roanoke with one desperate hope, that somehow, against all odds, his people had survived. When White stepped onto Roanoke Island, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The air was silent, too silent. No smoke from cooking fires, no sounds of children, no movement. As the group moved deeper into the settlement, the truth revealed itself slowly and terrifyingly. The houses were gone, not destroyed, carefully dismantled. Wooden structures had been taken apart piece by piece, as if the colonists had planned to leave. There were no signs of battle, no blood, no broken weapons, no graves, just emptiness. Then White saw it. Carved deeply into a wooden post near the entrance of the settlement was a single word, CROATOAN. No cross, no explanation, just the word. CROATOAN was the name of a nearby island and also the name of a Native American tribe known to be relatively friendly to the English. White felt a brief moment of hope. Maybe they had moved. Maybe they were alive. But before he could investigate further, a storm hit. A violent Atlantic storm tore through the area, damaging ships and killing sailors. The crew refused to stay longer. White was forced to leave again, this time forever. He never returned to Roanoke, and the 117 colonists were never seen again. No bodies were ever found, no confirmed records, no survivors. Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America, vanished before her 3rd birthday. Over the next 400 years, theories would explode. Some believed the colonists integrated with Native American tribes. Others believed they were massacred. Some whispered darker ideas, that disease wiped them out, or that they were hunted by forces no one understood. Artifacts have been found, bones, tools, strange symbols, but nothing conclusive. No final answer. The lost colony of Roanoke remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. A colony that didn't fall, a people that didn't fight, a settlement that simply disappeared. And all that remains is a single word carved into a tree. CROATOAN.
The tribe that may have absorbed a colony. The word CROATOAN did not mean safety. It did not mean rescue. It meant uncertainty. When John White sailed away from Roanoke for the last time, he carried that word with him like a wound that never healed. He would spend the rest of his life trying to understand what it meant, without ever finding peace. But history didn't stop searching. The CROATOAN were a Native American tribe living on Hatteras Island, just south of Roanoke. Unlike other tribes in the region, early English records describe them as relatively friendly, even cooperative. They traded food, they shared local knowledge, they spoke through interpreters, and most importantly, they were not at war with the English. This single fact would later become the foundation of the most hopeful and most controversial theory of all. In the years following Roanoke's disappearance, strange reports began to circulate. English explorers traveling deeper into the mainland heard rumors from native tribes, stories of white-skinned people living among them, people who spoke a broken version of English, people who prayed to a strange god and built homes differently. Some tribes claimed their ancestors had once taken in lost foreigners. Others spoke of children with gray eyes. At first, these stories were dismissed as myths until physical evidence began to surface. In the early 1700s, English surveyor John Lawson recorded something disturbing during his travels in the Carolinas. He wrote of native people who claimed descent from white settlers. He noted lighter skin tones, European-style facial features, and most chilling of all, they claimed their ancestors could read from a book. This was not a skill native tribes possessed before European contact. For centuries, historians debated whether these reports were exaggerated or misunderstood. But then, archaeology entered the conversation. In the 20th and 21st centuries, researchers began digging, not on Roanoke Island, but far beyond it. They found European-style tools buried in native settlements, gunflints of English origin, fragments of writing slates used to teach children. These were not items meant for trade, they were items meant for daily life. One discovery shook the academic world. A piece of pottery was found on Hatteras Island bearing a symbol that matched English colonial markings. Not Spanish, not French, English. The kind used by settlers, not explorers. Still, something didn't add up. If the colonists had simply moved and integrated peacefully, why had there been no written record, no official confirmation, no return message? And then came the darker theories. The southeastern coast of North America in the late 1500s was not stable. Drought had gripped the region for years. Tree ring data, something unknown to John White, but proven centuries later, revealed that Roanoke experienced the worst drought in 800 years during the colony's existence. Food would have been scarce, desperation would have been inevitable, and desperation breeds conflict. Some historians believe the colonists fractured into smaller groups. Some may have joined friendly tribes like the CROATOAN. Others may have wandered inland, weak, hungry, vulnerable. There they would have encountered tribes who saw them not as guests, but as threats. Spanish records from Florida mention English intruders being eliminated by native warriors. These reports were vague, but unsettling. If Spain knew English settlers were inland, they would have wanted them gone, quietly. And Spain had allies. Another theory suggests something even more brutal, that the colonists were killed by tribes who feared English expansion, and their disappearance was intentionally erased from memory to prevent retaliation. No bodies, no graves, no evidence left behind. A clean disappearance. But then there is the theory historians are most uncomfortable discussing. The theory that doesn't fit neatly into textbooks. The theory that feels wrong. Several early native legends speak of a time when ghost people arrived, pale, starving, broken. They brought disease, they brought death, they brought something that changed the land forever. Some tribes believed these people were cursed, and curses had to be destroyed. Could the Roanoke colonists have been killed to prevent the spread of disease? Smallpox was deadly, invisible, unstoppable. To a people with no immunity, it would have seemed like witchcraft. Killing the source may have felt like survival. But even this theory has holes, because if the colonists had been massacred, something would have been found. Weapons, bones, ashes. But Roanoke gave nothing. Then, in the 1990s, a new clue emerged, one that forced historians to reconsider everything. A faded map. John White was not just a governor, he was an artist. And artists leave clues. On one of White's original maps of the Roanoke region, researchers noticed something odd beneath a pasted patch. When examined under special lighting, a symbol appeared. A small star, marking a location far inland, near present-day Bertie County, North Carolina. Excavations began, and what they uncovered was disturbing. Fragments of European ceramics, food storage pits identical to English methods, and signs of long-term settlement. This wasn't a temporary camp. This was survival. The leading theory began to shift. The colonists didn't disappear overnight. They scattered. They adapted. They changed. They stopped being English. But this raises the most haunting question of all. If they survived, why didn't they ever come back? The answer may be fear. Fear of hostile tribes, fear of starvation, fear that England had abandoned them, or fear that returning would reveal how much they had changed. Imagine it. English men wearing native clothing, English women raising children who spoke another language, Christian prayers mixed with tribal rituals. They would not have been welcome in either world. So they vanished, by choice. Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America, may have grown up under another name. She may have lived, loved, died, without ever knowing she was history. The lost colony of Roanoke may not be a story of death. It may be a story of transformation, a story too complex for empire, too human for legend. And yet, there is still one problem, one detail that refuses to fit. If the colonists left voluntarily, why carve only one word? Why not explain? Why not leave directions? Why not beg for rescue? Because perhaps something went wrong, something unexpected, something that forced them to leave in a hurry. And that brings us to the final, most terrifying possibility, that Roanoke wasn't lost to hunger, or war, or disease, but to something that history refused to record.
The evidence history tried to bury. History is not always written by truth. Sometimes it is written by what survives, and sometimes by what is deliberately left out. Roanoke belongs to the third kind. For more than 3 centuries, historians avoided asking the most dangerous question. What if the colonists didn't disappear quietly? What if something happened that England didn't want remembered? Because once you ask that question, Roanoke stops being a mystery and starts becoming an accusation. In the late 1500s, England was obsessed with image. The New World was supposed to represent progress, destiny, divine approval. A failed colony was embarrassing. A destroyed colony was tragic. But a colony that collapsed into chaos, betrayal, or moral failure, that would have been unforgivable. Early English records about Roanoke are suspiciously thin. No detailed investigation, no official inquiry, no punishment for negligence, just silence. And silence is never empty. One of the strangest details is how calm the Roanoke site appeared. No signs of panic, no defensive structures, no rushed evacuation. This suggests something crucial. The colonists believed they were leaving temporarily, or they believed they were leaving for safety. But safety from what? Some answers may lie in the unrecorded violence of early colonization. English settlements elsewhere were not peaceful. They were brutal. Starvation drove people to extremes. Cannibalism was documented in Jamestown only a few decades later. Roanoke came before England learned how ugly survival could get. Imagine the situation. Years of drought, no resupply, growing hostility, children crying from hunger. Morality erodes quickly under those conditions. Rules break, trust breaks, and leadership becomes fragile. There is evidence, subtle but disturbing, that Roanoke may have suffered internal collapse. Some historians believe factions formed. One group wanted to integrate with native tribes. Another wanted to move inland. Another wanted to wait. And disagreement, under desperation, turns deadly. If violence occurred between colonists themselves, it would explain everything. No external battle signs, no mass grave, carefully dismantled homes, a controlled departure, a fractured people. But there is another layer, one that even modern academics hesitate to publish. In several native oral histories, there are references not just to white people, but to white people who broke taboos, who violated sacred rules, who hunted where they were forbidden, who desecrated land. To indigenous cultures, such actions were not crimes, they were threats to balance. And threats to balance had to be erased completely. No memorials, no warnings, no stories passed down, only whispers. One chilling detail appears again and again in regional legends. A group of outsiders who were taken into the forest, not welcomed, not killed publicly, taken, and never spoken of again. Now combine this with another historical reality: Spain. Spain had spies everywhere. Spanish records mention English movements along the coast. Spain feared England gaining a foothold. A quiet elimination of an English colony using local forces would have been ideal. No war, no evidence, no retaliation, just disappearance. But even that theory has a flaw. Spain documented everything, and Roanoke appears only as rumor, not victory, not confirmation, which means Spain may not have been responsible. Then there's the clue historians almost wish didn't exist. In the 1930s, stones began appearing, carved stones, each supposedly bearing messages from Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter. They described violence, death, and betrayal. Most historians dismissed them as hoaxes, but a few stones were different. They contained details only someone from Roanoke could have known. Too accurate to ignore, too disturbing to accept. One inscription described, "My people murdered by the savages." Another spoke of being forced inland. Another mentioned starvation and fear. If even one of those stones is authentic, then Roanoke was not peaceful, it was traumatic. And trauma changes behavior. Traumatized survivors don't leave neat messages, they leave fragments, like one word, one last attempt at meaning. CROATOAN may not have meant "we are safe," it may have meant "we had no choice." The deeper historians dig, the clearer one truth becomes. Roanoke wasn't lost because no one looked. It was lost because no one wanted to find it. Because the real story may expose colonial cruelty, cultural erasure, human collapse. And history prefers heroes, not broken people. Which brings us to the final question, the one that refuses to die. If the Roanoke colonists survived long enough to scatter, if they integrated, suffered, or were destroyed, why does America still feel haunted by them? Because Roanoke represents the moment when the New World said, "You are not in control." And England never forgave it. Why the lost colony still refuses to die. Some mysteries fade with time. Roanoke did the opposite. The longer history moved forward, the louder the silence became. By the 20th century, America had cities, highways, satellites, and nuclear power. Yet one simple question from the 1500s remained unanswered. What happened to 117 people who vanished in plain sight? And then science entered the story. For centuries, historians relied on journals, maps, and rumors. But modern investigators had something John White never could have imagined: DNA. If the colonists survived, if they integrated, if they left descendants, their blood would remember what history forgot. In the early 2000s, genetic researchers began quietly studying families along the Carolina coast, families who had lived there for generations, families with unusual oral histories, families who claimed native ancestry, but also something else, something English. The results were uncomfortable. In several Native American communities near Hatteras Island and inland North Carolina, researchers found European genetic markers dating back centuries, not recent, not colonial-era mixing from Jamestown, older, closer to Roanoke. Even more unsettling, some families carried English surnames that did not officially appear in America until much later, names that had no paper trail, no ship records, no legal arrival, as if they had entered history sideways. This forced historians to face a possibility they had avoided for 400 years, that the Roanoke colonists did not disappear, they dissolved, they became native, and in doing so, they erased themselves from English history. But if that is true, why didn't England ever acknowledge it? Why no rescue attempt? Why no follow-up expedition to Croatoan? Why no official closure? Because Roanoke challenged the entire colonial narrative. Empires are built on dominance. Roanoke suggested something far more threatening, that Europeans could fail, that survival required surrender, that the New World did not need to be conquered, only understood, and that idea was dangerous. As America grew, Roanoke took on a new role. It became a warning, a reminder that expansion without humility ends badly, a ghost story embedded in national memory. That's why Roanoke never received a heroic monument, no triumphant statues, no victory narrative, just questions. Even today, excavations continue. Every few years, a headline appears, new clue found in Roanoke mystery. And then, nothing, because each discovery answers one question and raises 5 more. The houses were dismantled carefully. The message was brief. The direction was intentional. These were not people running from panic. They were people making a decision, a terrible one. Imagine standing on Roanoke Island in 1590, no ships on the horizon, no voices from across the sea, only forest, water, and uncertainty. What would you do? Wait and die, or walk into the unknown? The lost colony chose the unknown, and in doing so, they broke the rules of history. They left no ending. Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America, became a symbol without a fate. Some legends say she grew up among the Croatoan. Some say she was renamed. Some say she became something else entirely. History does not confirm or deny. It simply refuses to speak. And that is why Roanoke still matters, not because it vanished, but because it reminds us that history is fragile, that stories survive only if someone writes them down, and that entire lives can disappear if no one is listening. America was not born cleanly. It was born through uncertainty, fear, compromise, and loss. Roanoke was the first crack in the dream, and the dream never fully recovered. Today, tourists walk Roanoke Island. They take photos, they read plaques, they leave, unaware that beneath their feet lies a story still unfinished. No bodies were found, no final words were written, only one message carved into wood, a direction, a possibility, a goodbye. Croatoan, not a mystery, a choice.